Happy soon-to-be Halloween, everyone!
I'm so excited!
Welcome back to Horror Convos, a casual, relaxing, and occasionally funny podcast where we choose one horror topic per episode and discuss any media related to it that we want. Movies, series, novels, comics, video games, radio dramas, nothing is off limits here. I often have guests join me as we compare opinions and personal experiences with the subject, including examples that we believe portray it effectively or ineffectively. If you wish an asteroid would come down to blow every last advertising corporation off the face of the earth, I would humbly suggest the less extreme alternative of visiting patreon.com/horrorconvos instead. Tier 1 membership gets you access to every podcast episode ad-free, along with other exclusive content, while Tier 2 membership allows you to vote on polls to decide topics for future exclusive episodes. We appreciate every dollar donated to help our little podcast grow. Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube and Spotify, so if you like what we do, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and stomp that notification bell so you never miss when our newest stuff is uploaded. With the sales pitch out of the way, you can fasten your seatbelts, hold on to your butts, and check to make sure the DeLorean's uranium is topped off, because we are rolling back the rock to the dawn of time this week to discuss one of my all-time favorite subjects in real-life horror. We see their descendants roam the world today in the forms of various birds, crocodiles, alligators, sharks, among many other creatures. I am talking about none other than dinosaurs. And joining me today once again is my friend, fellow dino fan, and Halloween franchise expert. Feel free to listen to our first episode on horror franchises to hear that conversation. Please welcome back Alfonso. So when were you first introduced to dinosaurs as a concept that got you interested in them? Like, I know we talked about Jurassic Park before, but was there anything before that, like as far as movies, books, anything?
Yeah, so when I was quite a bit younger than I am now, when I was a kid, the series Walking with Dinosaurs is what was kind of my introduction. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was like a BBC miniseries. Came out like in the late 1990s. I thought they really did a good job with CGI, and the narration was on point. That was kind of my introduction to dinosaurs. I also kind of had toy dinosaurs as a kid, those little miniature things. Would just play with them. As I got older, I would say my interest for dinosaurs kind of grew when I saw Jurassic Park for the first time and the subsequent sequels. So The Lost World, and then Jurassic Park 3, and then so on and so forth as I got older. So there were some books when I was going to elementary school that I checked out about dinosaurs that were illustrations and the like, and I was really mesmerized by them for a time that it's still hard for me to believe even now that they existed.
It's just a prank, bro.
Your experience sounds very similar to mine. I mean, I vaguely remember watching Walking with Dinosaurs when it came on TV. I mean, I would have been very little at the time. I was born in 1991. And so I don't remember anything specific about it, but I do remember watching it. I don't know if I caught it all at once or if some of it I just caught later on over time. I don't remember how many parts there were to it. Yeah, outside of that, I think it was largely the same with me. You first hear about them in books, learning about them in school, and then of course I think for millennials onward, or the gateway for a lot of us in terms of film was Jurassic Park, because the only example in film I can think of before that really would leave an impact on me is The Land Before Time. That came out in 1988. That's my earliest memory of at least seeing a dinosaur in animation. I don't know if it was the first time I saw one, period, but the shark tooth in the original Land Before Time, back when Don Bluth was going hard with that franchise before it got all family friendlied up and sanitized as the sequels went on. And no, this was old school Secret of Nim Don Bluth. What wasn't screwing around. Well, not afraid to traumatize children, teach you about the concept of mortality on a much harder level than Disney did. That Don Bluth before he got into a troll in Central Park in the late '80s or the '90s. There's a very specific divide between '80s Bluth and '90s Bluth. But yeah, that shark tooth, if I still haven't seen any version of a dinosaur in animation that quite matches that in terms of how expressive it was and how they really just almost demonize it with how evil it looks. Because it's like the way they portrayed the bear in The Fox and the Hound. It doesn't even look like an animal. It looks like a legit monster with the fiery red eyes. And part of what makes these creatures so interesting and enduring in pop culture, I believe, is very much like what makes religion so enduring is they have a very similar sense of mystery to them. In terms of, how many different interpretations there have been and how much subjectivity and debate there still is on the topics regarding them. It's ever since I've first learned about them in school, it's the number of times I've heard that the scientific community changed its mind about, did dinosaurs have feathers? Did they not have feathers? Did this or that kind of bird evolve from them? Or did it actually go down this evolutionary path? It's there's so little consensus, the definitive consensus that I've managed to narrow down. And it's including in the overlap between science and religion. I took a Bible study class in college. I didn't go to church growing up. That just wasn't something that our family did. But I did take a Bible study course with one of the teachers I would develop kind of a friendship with outside of the classes. We would have all these in-depth conversations of him educating me on stuff that my grandmother and some family members had taught me about the Bible. I heard plenty of stories from the Bible growing up, but I don't know if he was a professor or not, but he and I would just talk for up to an hour in between my classes while I'm waiting for my next course to start. And I would just ask him question after question, honestly being open to learn more. I've always been kind of fascinated by different religions and cultures' spiritual beliefs. I never went into, theology as a major. That wasn't something I was passionate enough about to pursue for a degree. But interestingly enough, there are debates to this day over the Christian Bible's interpretations of something called the Tannin.
Flawless pronunciation.
In English Bibles, that translates as, from what I understand, sea monster, serpent, most commonly dragon. And it's referenced 30 times in the Old Testament. There's also a mention of the behemoth, quote, a giant whose tail is likened to a cedar tree. So depending on which biblical scholars you ask, something equivalent to dinosaurs is referenced in the Bible. And there's ancient artifacts from several different cultures, including cultures, if I remember right, that had no contact, at least no documented contact between each other. And you find illustrations and descriptions, written descriptions as well, resembling what we would come to know as, common descriptions of dinosaurs. Multiple cultures, I don't even know how many, across... Yes, I don't know how many thousands of years have had very similar accounts, despite the distance of geography and time periods between them. That can't all be a coincidence. Am I right?
I think not.
I guess aside from that and Jurassic Park, you have do you remember the Disney movie Dinosaur, Disney Pixar?
Yes, I do. I loved that movie when I first saw it when I was younger. What?
Same here. It's so underrated. Yeah, it came out in 2000, right towards the tail end of like the big boom year for CGI. Like the 90s is when CG was really starting to become the norm. Then the 2000s, like, you know, the start of the next millennium, it's like we're on the tail end of like the Matrix had just come out. You know, Star Wars was a big thing again with the Phantom Menace. So you could argue that the 2000s was really when the CGI craze took off. But the 90s definitely kick-started it, or like walked so the 2000s could run. But yeah, in terms of computer animated dinosaurs, I mean, that movie was on par with anything I was seeing on, like, you know, Discovery Channel or Animal Planet. I mean, I don't know how. I would have to rewatch Walking with Dinosaurs to see how the computer animation in that holds up compared to this movie's animation. But like for 2000, even by today's standards, that movie holds up so well in terms of how like near photorealistic everything looked, all the way down to the water. It's like when I first saw that in theaters as a kid, it's like they showed the dinosaurs like pushing down into the sand to get to that underground water for all the characters to drink. And it's like, I just remember this must have been how people felt going to see the Lord of the Rings movies, you know, with Gollum splashing around through the water. And I remember just looking at this, and even today I'll rewatch it, and I'm just like, this is fucking amazing looking animation. Like this looks like real water. Like that dinosaur foot, it's wet. It looks like it's actually interacting with like this real life liquid. And even today I go back and I'm just like, how the hell? Like, what software were you working with to do this back in 2000? It's just, oh my God, it was mind blowing to me.
No, it's funny that you mentioned the film Dinosaur, because I don't know if you remember the scene where Aladar is getting ambushed by this pack of raptors, right? There's this dust storm that kicks up, and he runs into the main herd, and that's where his introduction is to the herd of survivors. One of the things I've thought about,
bumps into Crone.
Yeah. But one of the things I thought about that could have made that scene so much better, in my opinion, was what if the two red Carnotaurs had suddenly appeared during that dust storm and attacked the herd during that scene? That would have added so much more suspense. Like, I would have loved that as a climactic scene. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I mean, the dust storm would have added more chaos to it, but that would have been so awesome to have seen that.
That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, I guess you would have to change the timing of when it occurs in the story, like make it more of a third act deal. But I guess you'd have to find a way to reconcile that with, you know, not interfering with the intensity of the raptor chase and, you know, Aladar kind of bumbling his way into the herd and getting knocked over by Crone and all that. Yeah, so I guess you'd have to find a way for the two groups to meet each other by accident. But if you're in an open field like that and you don't have the dust storm to obscure your vision, then the question becomes, okay, well then how do you make that happen? And because, I mean, without the dust storm, the herd would have seen his like little group coming from a mile away. They would have seen the raptors. So I'm not sure how. It's possible you could still make that work within the story, but I guess I'm just wondering how you would do that without ruining the impact of that scene, because that's an important point in the narrative too, how they seem to find each other by like a happy coincidence. And so, but that's definitely an interesting idea. It as it relates to horror, what scared me the most in that movie, apart from how realistic the predatory dinosaurs looked, was the Carnotorosaurus. I forget what the full name for it is, but they just call it Carnotaur in the film. Like, I didn't even know that was the scientific name for them when I first saw the movie. I thought it was like, oh, we call the T-Rex shark tooth, so this is the name we made up to call these things, because it's like the Greek, Latin, whatever language to describe them didn't exist back then, so we're just kind of just going with more creative names, and then I found out, oh, that's actually the name, which arguably kind of breaks immersion a little bit. Like, how would they know to call them that? But then again, how would dinosaurs know how to talk like humans? So you gotta suspend disbelief, I guess, either way. But yeah, the Carnotaurs, that was like a T-Rex mixed with the devil, just with those horns. And it's like, when I learned that was a real thing, I was just like, oh my God, like nature was so scary back then, much more so compared to today. It's like, it's just, people debate to this day in the scientific community whether there was any overlap between humans and dinosaurs existing alongside one another. And I'm just like, add that to the list of reasons I'm grateful to have been a 90s kid. Like, can you imagine growing up back then, even like post-extinction event, where the only dinosaurs left may have been like a few stragglers that weren't immediately wiped out by the asteroid? And humans just like hunted the ones that were left for like food or something, like alongside woolly mammoths, I guess. And I'm no scientist, no idea how that works with human timeline. Yeah, it just, I tell you, the more I learned about dinosaurs, the more I thought to myself, these things are like the closest thing we have to real life monsters. I mean, it's no wonder some people even today have a hard time believing they existed, because it's like, dragons, sea serpents, the kraken, almost every mythological creature that we have is in some degree based on something we actually encountered in the real world. And it's like, how do you get more over the top, even in the animal kingdom? How do you get crazier than fucking dinosaurs? It's just, you can't do it, man.
No, it's like, for me, I'm still perplexed by it. Like, I can't believe that they were actually real.
What about Godzilla? Did you grow up watching?
I was just gonna. I watched the 1998 film with Matthew Broderick, right? Yeah, I remember.
Same.
I remember that one. That's the only one. I didn't unfortunately watch the classic ones, the black and white Japanese films. Unfortunately, I've seen the 1998 film.
Yeah, I grew up watching some of the older ones. Then I think the 1998 film was my introduction to the character and the concept, and then I would see some of the older ones on TV every now and then at my grandmother's place. I am in a minority, I know that, but I will defend the 1998 film to my grave, that even though it's not a good Godzilla movie, it is an entertaining movie on its own merits. Like, if they had called it anything other than Godzilla, I don't think people would judge it nearly as harshly as they do. I talked with my stepbrother Zach about this in a older episode of the podcast where we discussed the horror of kaiju, and that episode we focused mainly on the Godzilla franchise. If you count that as a dinosaur franchise, I personally would, because, I mean, the number of dinosaur franchises out there, it's like outside of Jurassic Park and the two we just mentioned, like Land Before Time I don't think Land Before Time has been relevant for years. That series fell off by the time I was like in high school.
Yeah.
So outside of that and Disney Pixar's dinosaur, I mean, if you don't count Godzilla, then pretty much you're just left with Jurassic Park or maybe Land of the Lost at that point. But I think the only exposure people have to Land of the Lost by now is the Will Ferrell movie that came out like in like the late 2000s, I think, or the 2010s. So yeah, I personally count it, because I mean, as fantastical as the characters are and Godzilla himself is, he's pretty blatantly a dinosaur. He's literally just a dinosaur with superpowers who's like a metaphor for the paranoia of atomic warfare. Like, he's a freaking T-Rex with spikes and atomic breath. If you take the superpowers away, he's literally a T-Rex. Like I said, I don't know of anything you could compare him to at that point, if not a dinosaur.
I'm a dinosaur.
I think you're right, but I think for those like diehard, maybe Jurassic Park fans, or those like really into dinosaurs, maybe paleontologists, I wonder what they would have to say about Godzilla. I mean, it kind of looks like a mixture, an amalgamation of a T-Rex with a Stegosaurus because the plate's all in its back. That's what I think of when I think about it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Like basically a T-Rex mixed with a Stegosaurus, or I mean, if you want to get technical, depending on what version of Godzilla we're talking about, they change his proportions up, so often. The original Godzilla, you could argue, was more T-Rex-like, but then the lankier ones, like the 1998 one, he's more blatantly just a mutated iguana. But, yeah, by Shin Godzilla, maybe you could argue that was back to the T-Rex model, but it depends on how his limbs are in proportion to his head and his midsection, because, like, some versions where his body gets, like, tinier with the head and thin with the tail, but then more like oval in the midsection. You could argue that that's more Stegosaurus-like, but when he's getting into like, the walking tank kind of body structure where he's just like, stomping along, that's pretty obviously the T-Rex.
With Godzilla, its influence on popular culture is strong like Jurassic Park, right? Because Godzilla has been referenced in numerous television and TV shows, just like I remember The Simpsons had a quick episode where they went to Japan. There was that reference towards the end when they're flying away. And also the Powerpuff Girls, the Cartoon Network series. I think obviously like a giant monster destroying a city. Obviously, I think that's a direct reference to Godzilla. And that's kind of been referenced in numerous.
Townsville.
Yes,
the city
yes,
of
yes.
Townsville
It's been
is the worst city to live on the planet since Tokyo.
The city of Townsville is on fire!
What about Gotham City? I think Gotham would beg to differ on that.
Are you kidding? I would live in Gotham easily, but before I go with Tokyo and the Kaiju universe, it's like the worst thing you have to worry about in Gotham on average is getting mugged or like becoming a supervillain hostage, and even then, like 99.9% of the time that the Bat family gets you out of the situation somehow. Oh, worst comes to worst, you have to take therapy for a few years. If I lived in the universe where Kaiju were real, anyone, I discussed this with Zach, it's like nobody would still be living in Tokyo after the first, at most, the first 2 Godzilla incidents. It's like,
fuck this shit, I'm out.
Yeah, I would totally understand that. I don't think I'd be able to live in a world with giant monsters.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
It's like, think about it. Like, if you're
That's scarier than Chucky.
Seriously, it's like if you're a cop living in that universe and you get someone out on a ledge who's like, I'm gonna do it, fuck this shit, I'm not doing this anymore, this is not worth it, and the cop has to go out like, no buddy, we can work this out, and it's like, you give me one fucking reason to risk living through another year of this shit. Do you know how many highways I have had to go around to get to work? All the rubble, the sheer amount of rubble, and just trails of destruction. I continually have to get my phone GPS to reroute me around so I can get to my job on time and provide for my family. My wife literally took the kids because I couldn't get around all the shit that is still being cleaned up years later. Give me one good reason to go through another year of this crap. I wouldn't be surprised if the cop was at a loss for words. Not advocating suicide for those listening. Don't at me, YouTube, but I'm just saying, the guy on the ledge is making some fair points.
That reminds me really quick of that scene in Scary Movie where that teacher's on top of the high school building. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes,
that's the type of guy I imagine when you talked about that.
What are you waiting for?
What am I waiting for? What am I waiting for?
What are you waiting for?
Fuck you!
Did you ever play Dino Crisis, or did you have any exposure to that, or were you aware of it growing up?
This isn't a joke, you idiot. We were just attacked by a big-ass lizard.
I wasn't aware of it until recently, the last few years. I'm not a gamer, but I've looked at like reviews and cutscenes of a lot of video games because I'm entertained by that. Like with Dino Crisis, it kind of reminds me of a mixture of Jurassic Park and Resident Evil or Silent Hill.
That
in my
literally
opinion.
is what it is. Is that Capcom basically put it out as, I mean, Capcom made Resident Evil too. You know, Konami made Silent Hill. Literally, it's like it's a Jurassic Park horror game in everything but name, because like so many of its story elements, since that like are literally just ripped off Jurassic Park. Or like Regina, you know, the redhead, it going in her like badass security paramilitary uniform with her squad to investigate, you know, the dinosaurs that have broken out of the scientific facility on the island. And it's literally John Hammond's military team that went to Site B, and then I guess they got killed off. Like in between the end of the first Jurassic Park and the beginning of the Lost World, I think there was an incident when, go back to when Isla Nublar, that's Site 1, Isla Sorna, if I remember right, was Site B. So Isla Sorna, you had the initial downfall of the island, which we talked about before, how that would be perfect for the premise of a Jurassic Park horror game, like an official one. Just go back to day one when the island started falling apart, and like you're a scientist or a security guard trying to survive long enough to get off the island. Just treat it like Dead Rising. It's like you're there, you got to survive long enough to escape, you know, rescue as many survivors as you can. Maybe there's a conspiracy you try to unravel that InGen is trying to cover up what's happening, so they're not letting anyone leave. But it's like that's just off the top of my head, that's just one of the dozens of ways that, you know, the people in charge of the IP, and it's like you had literal decades and dozens upon dozens of different ideas that could have easily made for a good Jurassic Park horror game. Like, there's no excuse for how poorly that franchise has been handled in video gaming history. Because you look at the history of Jurassic Park games, almost every single one of them was a dud. Or even if they made money, they took so little advantage of the horror factor that made the first movie arguably the first two movies so effective. I mean, apart from the Lost World arcade, I can't think of a single Jurassic Park game that was actually scary. You know, some of them came close. The narrative driven Telltale game was they almost had that. But it was a point and click, like, you know, story driven game. You know, you don't really have enough meat on the gameplay there, in my opinion, to really immerse yourself in the experience of, like, they don't give you enough control as the character, in my opinion. It's similar to criticisms I heard of Telltale's Walking Dead games. Means that, you know, if you like that style of gameplay, it was really effective as a storytelling device, but for most zombie fans, it's like you want to actually be in the world, like playing through a survival simulator, or, you know, as opposed to just, oh, click here, I'll walk there, click here, I'll go interact with that. You know, I'll go through this conversation simulator to see if I can, you know, get the right results that I wanted. You know, that's like treating Jurassic Park with an Until Dawn gameplay format. I don't know if you know of Until Dawn, no. Yeah, that style of gameplay just doesn't lend itself, in my opinion, very strongly to really taking full advantage of Jurassic Park's premise. Is to really, like, scare the hell out of you in terms of you being in that situation.
Regina's a badass. Yeah, you're right. And kind of like for, I guess, diehard gamer fanboys, let's just say, I guess I understand it to be that there are simps out there for her character.
Hey, fangirls too. Fangirls too. Yeah, you can't discount the lesbians and the bis. He said we are pro LGBT, all the alphabets on this podcast. Regina is an equal opportunity sex object for everyone. And but yes, I do not disagree. On the list of redheaded crushes that were popular in media, definitely throughout the 90s and 2000s, I would think Regina from Dino Crisis and whatever her name is from Blood Rain, the vampire action horror series. I never played that, but I knew of the character. They made a couple movies based off of that one. From that period when video game movies were generally considered like a poisoned well. Well, before people started figuring out how to actually do them, semi-decently. I think to this day, that's the closest we've gotten to like a well-done Jurassic Park horror game is like the first two Dino Crisis games. It's because like the third one, most people generally agree the third one sucked. Like it moved almost entirely away from horror and just doubled down on the action aspect. The first one is pretty much beat for beat. Like, you go to the science facility, you're surviving dinosaurs, it's survival horror. You are playing a badass character as opposed to an everyman protagonist, but still, you are very much like underpowered against most of the enemies you come up against. So it's like, if you had to pick a creature to compete with Resident Evil zombies and Silent Hill's supernatural entities, as far as like real life choices go, you can't do much better than dinosaurs. Because like if you put them up against each other, it's like even Pyramid Head would have a hard time with a T-Rex. It's like, let's be honest. Like Silent Hill monsters are intimidating on a human versus monster scale. Well, they're going to get their shit rocked 9 times out of 10 if you put them up against dinosaurs. There's like even a raptor, I think, would tear through Silent Hill pretty easily. Like most of them.
Really? You think really
yeah,
with
like,
even the nurses, even with the nurses in the
okay. The scariest thing about the nurses is their body language and the fact that they don't have faces. It's basically like what makes Slender Man scary. If you put Chris Redfield or anyone who knows how to actually fight in Silent Hill, most of those monsters are getting their shit rocked pretty easily. Only one you might have a legitimate physical challenge from is the boss characters, like again Pyramid Head. But even then, it's like the moment you get your hands on a good gun with enough ammo in it, you can just shoot most of them from a distance. It's like apart from the lying figure and the flying enemies, it's like how many Silent Hill monsters are actually effective in a fight if you make it a ranged battle, like mid to long range. Most of those monsters are designed for close combat, which makes sense, for a horror game, because the hook of Silent Hill's horror was like, oh my god, what is this thing? Get it away from me. Hey, it's like the horror is when they get close to you. But if you give James or Harry or Heather like a machine gun or an AK-47, and literally you can just mow them down from like 20 yards away if you got decent aim. It's
that's fair.
Let's be honest. It's like even one raptor. It's like they're as fast as they are, as sharp as those claws are, the bite strength on those teeth. One raptor would tear through Brookhaven Hospital like it's nothing, and no nurse is going to take that thing down with a rusted pipe or a pair of rusty scissors. It's just you need like a dozen nurses to have a chance against one raptor. Plus, bear in mind those nurses, like their body language is so and uncoordinated. It's like you got to wonder how effective they would even be being able to get a blow in on it before it takes them down. Even Pyramid Head moves at a snail's pace most of the time. If you played the original Silent Hill 2, it's like I didn't play those games because I was too scared.
I've only seen cutscenes of the film of those games. Yeah, and the 2006 movie.
It's like you play the original game and you get to the first boss battle with Pyramid Head. Literally, he's so slow that once you know his attack pattern, I've watched walkthroughs of people playing as James. You literally just run to one corner of the room, pop, couple rounds from your gun, and he'll try to raise his buster sword to stab at you. Just it's so easy to dodge. Like you'd have to stand still for him to get you, or miss time when you start dodging. But again, it's very easy to pick up on, and you just run to the other side, pop. He's coming at you. Run to the other side. Pop. You literally just do this like a couple dozen times, depending on the difficulty level, for how much damage he can take. And then he just leaves the room, and that's the end of the boss fight. So it's like, realistically, like as much as I love Resident Evil and Silent Hill, I imagine that Resident Evil would be more of a toss-up, because those monsters have much more going for them in terms of, how tough they can be. Like a T-Rex would stomp a tyrant pretty easily, I would think. But you get into the more dinosaur-sized Resident Evil monsters like El Gigante, and that could go either way.
Man, I didn't think of it that way, but I was just going to say, Keith, you probably may have upset some really diehard fans of Silent Hill with that hot take right there.
I know, that
just charges right through.
Yeah,
you did.
I can feel, I know a thing. Flames coming up underneath me.
I know a thing or two about triggering gatekeepers, but you're good.
Yeah, I'm definitely in gatekeeper hell right now. I can already, I'm already sweating. Just the hate mail will definitely keep me occupied with my popcorn for a while. But the crazy thing is, as obscure as Dino Crisis may be to people who didn't grow up playing it, it's still relevant in pop culture to some degree. Like people to this day have been begging Capcom to remake it, and they recently made a statement. I believe I forget what news outlet it was, but they said they have no plans to revisit that franchise anytime soon because they're focused on Resident Evil and whatever their main IPs are right now, like Resident Evil and whatever else. They're just, for whatever reason, they have no interest in going back to Dino Crisis. And most of the fans, they have the same opinion as me, that they're just like, why? It's just sitting there. It's money in the bank. Literally all, you saw the success with the Resident Evil remakes. Literally all you would have to do is just remake even just the first Dino Crisis game. Arguably the first two. If they do well enough, then you could maybe justify, taking a crack at remaking 3. That would be the one you'd have to change the most extensively to, get people to even give it a chance, compared to the original 3. But it's just, I do not understand this, why these companies that have just a gift-wrapped stack of dollar bills just waiting to be had, and you just, I mean, this property's been around since 1999. It's 2024, and you're just doing nothing with it. You won't sell it to another studio to do something with it. It's like, this is exactly what people, one of the reasons people hated Konami for years with their handling of Silent Hill. Because after Book of Memories, I think it was, or Downpour was the last mainline game up until recently. Yeah, and then you had Book of Memories, which I think that was the multiplayer game. They left it alone until 2014 with PT, the playable teaser for what the canceled Silent Hills. And then, Konami gave a middle finger to fans, not only have we canceled the project, you can't even play PT anymore. They took it off the PlayStation Store. And I don't understand how these companies think sometimes. It makes no economic sense why you won't just give your consumers, you're willing to pay you consumers what they've been asking you for literally for decades now. It's the fact that people are still talking about it to this day, that should tell you something. It's what are you afraid of? That you did such a good job remaking this series, bringing it back to prominence, It's how hard is it to do the same with this series when it's literally just Resident Evil with dinosaurs?
Maybe studio interference has a part to do with that, Keith. I don't know. I mean, studio execs might not see the value of remaking Dino Crisis. They might see the cash cow being Resident Evil. That maybe that's it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know why they're, like you said, why they're not trying to renew interest for this IP.
It's my IP to sit on and do nothing with.
Getting more into the Jurassic Park franchise, which would you say is better overall as a story, the books or the movies? Because Michael Crichton, he wrote the Jurassic Park, then the Lost World, and by the time 3 came around, they were pretty much flying blind at that point with what they wanted to do with the mythology. I've heard arguments either way that Spielberg made a more easily digestible, accessible movie. He was very much like a family picture kind of guy. So he had that going for him, which is why it was so popular. But I've heard people argue that from a storytelling standpoint, the movie doesn't have nearly as much meat on it compared to the book. Like the book's story and its original versions of the characters aren't as likable from what I hear. Like a lot of characters in the book, they're pretty much assholes. But the arguments I heard are generally to the effect of you might not like it as much as Steven Spielberg's version, but it's the better told version of the story, or the better constructed overall. So what do you think on that?
Since I've read both Michael Crichton's original Jurassic Park and The Lost World, I think from a narrative and storytelling perspective, it's the blueprint. Like I loved both novels. Now I know why some characters, they had to be changed in Spielberg's adaptation, right? Because John Hammond in the book by Michael Crichton is a full-blown a-hole, man. He is just like, you get that sense of how thick-headed he is, this capitalist. Like he really sold the a-holeness for John Hammond. Michael Crichton did in the book, and he later met his demise in the novel. And I would say, though, Steven Spielberg made a great choice in having Richard Attenborough portray John Hammond as the jovial, happy, go-lucky version of John Hammond that was a departure from the novel. He made him into a very likable character. And I agree with that, but I think story-wise, the novels by Michael Crichton were the blueprint, because really quick, in the novel of the first book, the opening scene I wish they would have used for the first Jurassic Park movie is, it starts off with the helicopter that lands on the Costa Rican mainland, right? At this hospital. And it lands on a helipad. A bunch of people come out. The ER staff of this hospital tends to this person, one of these people who are obviously injured. He's got like a bunch of claw marks across his chest. And the people that are with him said, oh, he had an accident. So they didn't elaborate what that type of accident was. What implication was, it was a velociraptor that did that damage. I wish Steven Spielberg would have done that for the opening of the first movie, because I think by having it the way he did with the raptor being put into the crate and then being put into that paddock, that already showed the dinosaurs too quickly. I think it kind of ruined the mystique of it for the movie. I think they should have maybe kept it a little bit of a mystery as the running time progressed, but that's just my opinion. Another thing I would say is there's a scene from the first book where they're in the computer, they're in the control room, and they have like all this data and numbers of every single dinosaur on the island in terms of population. And what was really scary scenes was that there was a moment in the book where they did like a calculation on the computer, and the population number was more than what they had anticipated. That was scary. For me, that's scary. I mean, can you imagine like expecting, okay, there's this number of dinosaurs, but then it's showing this number double? That
that ties into the twist about the frog DNA, doesn't it? As to how they started reproducing, and because like I forget the exact. It's been a while since I rewatched the first Jurassic Park. Okay, like when I was prepping for this episode, it's like I went back through, kind of like a speed run, skimming the history of the franchise to kind of. I was going by the cliff notes basically. Going through like multiple videos to try and catch myself up on like keeping myself straight on everything that's happened from point A to B to C, whatever. And some lines I remember, some I don't. Yeah, but there's that part where Alan talks to Lex and Timmy about how and this was brilliantly foreshadowed in the whole like first act when the wonder of the Jurassic Park concept has really like grabbed everyone, and so their critical thinking hasn't really kicked in yet. That they're all just too busy, asking John, and how did you do this or that? Like, oh my God, you pulled this off and that off, and they're enjoying the ride of it, like the audience is, and then they. During the whole Mr. DNA sequence, which I still love that character so much. That's the part of the movie that felt the most to me like a Disney movie. That whole like cartoon intro, like this is exactly what Walt Disney would have done for people entering Disneyland for the first time if he wanted to introduce them to how this world that you're stepping into worked. And Greg Burson, the guy who voiced Mr. DNA, a controversial voice actor if you read up on his history, but he's also famous for voicing Yogi Bear. I love the way he says dinosaur. Like, it's not dinosaur, it's dino plus sour, like Sour Patch Kids. That perfect little amount of southern drawl, like dinosaur.
Dinosaurs, dinosaur, dinosaurs, dinosaur.
It's just, I swear, you do not understand and how much we were quoting that guy growing up. It's just the amount of kids that were saying that, and now it's made a comeback. Like when the Jurassic World era started, like the newer films, and they brought him back in like a cameo. You see like a hologram of him playing the old message that he was going through in Jurassic World, when you see all the kids gathered around listening to him, and how much more high tech he looks. That's one thing. Very few things I unironically praise about the new era Jurassic films. That one bit of nostalgia bait I appreciated, because it totally felt like something that they would realistically do if and when they tried to build the park again. And I remember he mentions the part about filling the gaps of the prehistoric preserved DNA from the mosquitoes, that the DNA strand was broken, so they had to fill it in with DNA from frogs. And then Dr. Grant talks about how some frogs can change their sex when their population declines. Means that to help them, get their numbers back up in reproduction. And it's like, on one hand, if you think about it scientifically, not a scientist here, it probably doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Explaining that with like first you have to suspend disbelief that the DNA even being salvageable after 65 million years. Like, you got to ignore that DNA degrades over time. And so even if you pull that out of the mosquito from the amber, it's like that would be like trying to breastfeed a baby with dust that you extracted from a skeleton's breast. You're probably not going to get much of anything out of it at that point. But even if you overcome that hurdle, you then have to ask, would a frog's DNA be compatible with dinosaurs? And even if it was, hurdle number 3, would it really allow their reproductive organs or their sex change to happen like that? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's not. If I had to venture a guess, I'm pretty sure that's not how genetic modification works regarding reproduction. And like that sounds to me like a 1 in a billion fluke. Which, granted, the movie does frame it that way. They clearly didn't anticipate that happening. But if you're telling me you had the technology and the knowledge to do all this other shit, and you didn't account for that being a possibility, like that never happened. We're supposed to believe that sex change thing never once happened with these dinos during the testing phase. These before they started like pumping out more numbers of them, and like only now at the worst possible time is that has that started to occur, or were the park's security people just nobody found those dino eggs being produced in the wild until Grant just happened upon that news?
Right.
It is just
right.
You kind of have to suspend disbelief at quite a few things for that story to work.
Yeah, but one of the things that's departure from the movie compared with the novel is within the first novel by Michael Crichton, the Henry Wu has this conversation with John Hammond in his bungalow in the novel. And basically they made dinosaurs that were extremely accurate. And Henry Wu says that that's going to be an issue when you open the park, because it's like, we made real dinosaurs, John, but people aren't going to buy it because they're real. They're 100% real. Like they're exactly from their fossil counterparts, that they weren't like genetically engineered or altered in any way. And John Hammond had an issue with that. And it was like, well, what do you mean? Like, no, apparently in the novel, they were like extremely 100% real. Like they were accurate. And Henry Wu said that they needed to genetically modify them. And I thought that was interesting. I'm like, well, why? And John Hammond's like, well, I asked for real dinosaurs. You gave me real dinosaurs. How is that a problem? He's like, well, the audience, the people that come to visit the island probably aren't going to buy it as being real. And I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. I'm like, that's a little bit of a contradiction there, like a departure from what Steven Spielberg did with the frog DNA to bridge the gap of the DNA sequences, right? No, but that's crazy that Henry Wu would say, okay, we need to slow them down because they move too quickly, because they're 100% real, because they're the real deal. They're not like genetically modified in any way. And I was like, after I read that, I was like, what the heck? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But then another thing that really doesn't make sense, well, that kind of was really, you want to talk about horror, is in the novel when Dr. Grant and his party go to their lodging for the night before they start the tour the next day. In the novel, they notice that there's bars on the windows of where they're staying, like these bars over the windows. And Grant has this conversation with Ellie Sattler about that. And they wonder, what's the deal with those bars in the windows? I thought that was a very effective description, because that sounds scary too, because what are they trying to keep out?
This is supposed to be a family-friendly, 100% safe location, John. That's what you told us. You're trying to sell us on your park full of dinosaurs. What's the deal with your bars on the windows? Why would we need that?
Yeah, I want to talk about
all the Jerry Seinfeld fans. I'm sure all the Jerry Seinfeld fans are just finding some way to accuse me of being anti-Semitic right now, just for how horrible that impression was. It was just like, honestly, how many times did Jerry Seinfeld actually say, "What's the deal?" Like that's such an iconic thing associated with him. But how many times did he say that in his actual stand-up? I heard him say it at least once, but was it really so common that that's become like his line? I don't know. No. You know what? They had very big OSHA violations in Jurassic Park in the movie. I mean, come on, like you got a guy opening up the because first of all, the guy opening the gate right for the raptor to come in. No. Okay, so why are you going to get a guy by himself to open up that gate by himself with no help? And then, instead of, you would think they would try to either sedate that raptor or something to get it in there safely, because anything could go wrong. Like, and then Muldoon, I saw like this Jurassic Park podcast. I don't know the name off the top of my head, but they wrecked that scene with Muldoon. Like, if Robert Muldoon is supposed to be like this expert on raptors, right? He's depicted in the movie, right? Wouldn't he? Why would you first piss off the raptor by having like these bright lights when you're bringing into the
into the paddock. Like you're prying in his face, you're pissing it off, and then when you open the gate, the raptor just immediately attacks the gatekeeper, and then Muldoon is acting so like so confused. He's like, shoot her, and I thought by when he said that they killed it, but no, they probably just issued tranquilizers for it, because obviously I think it's implied that raptor scene in the opening of the movie is the big one, which is what they call the main raptor, and that which is, you can consider the primary dinosaur antagonist of the first movie, aside from the T-Rex, but that's a whole different story. But no, and then Muldoon, but I was going to say with Muldoon though, they also kind of trashed him when he let, oh, poor Sam Jackson, he can't catch a break, man. He let him go by himself to turn the power on. Do you think that was a good idea? How come Muldoon should have went with him, said, hey, you need backup here?
Thank you. I said this for years. It's like Sam Jackson, you get Samuel Jackson in your movie and you kill him off screen in just one of the most uncelebratory ways possible. It's like, as a kid, I almost didn't remember what happened to him in the movie until I rewatched it a few times. It's like one of the most common things with me looking back on these movies. I look back to what I remember about the first movie. I have to remind myself, wait a minute, what happened to Sam Jackson? And it's like, I remember everything about his involvement up through the hold on to your butts. It's when he's trying to, reboot the station or whatever. It's like, oh, we got to go here to turn the power back on. And then it's like, there's just this gap in my memory where it's like my brain dies. And then we fast forward to Ellie finding the power switch, and she's like, I think we're back in business. Like, that is the most adorable scene with her, by the way. Like, I love Laura Dern's performance. Like, I love Laura Dern in general. Like, that film was my introduction to her. She became one of my celebrity crushes for a minute, as far as the blonde crushes after that movie. And then sometime, like, shortly afterwards, she finds Sam. She's running from the raptors, and there's that fake out of like, oh, Sam Jackson, oh, I'm so glad you're here. And she pulls out his severed arm, just like, and it's like, that's where my memory picks up again. And I'm just like, well, wait a minute, like, what happened to him before that? Did we see him like go to that power station before she got there? It's like, I have to rewatch it again. I feel like I'm misremembering a part of him us actually seeing him go in there.
And you know what's ironic is Muldoon was a head of security for Jurassic Park. So why didn't John Hammond say, okay, no, Arnold, you're not going by yourself out there. Muldoon's going to go with you. Isn't that right, Robert? No, you would think that would, because why are you going to go take some guy unarmed, well, no pun intended, but with no weapon of any kind outside with the power down, where these man-eating dinosaurs are loose? I would not step. If I would have been Arnold, I would have just been like, hey, John, I'm not being paid enough for this, man. You want me to risk my life by going out there, turn the power back on? There's no way. And I'm not doing it.
If I remember right, I mean, I was about to say, well, why did Muldoon go off on his own in the first place? Wouldn't it be smarter for anyone going outside to like stick together in a party, to watch each other's backs? But in defense of that, they did have multiple goals they were trying to accomplish, so it's like it was kind of an excuse the story came up with to spread the group out, like the whole Scooby Gang, splitting up the contrivance. And if I remember right, Muldoon went off on his own because John asked him to go and find Lex and Timmy to bring them back, because he didn't know that. I don't think he knew that Alan was watching out for them. So if I had to guess, it's like if it wasn't for Tim and Lex's safety being in the equation, Muldoon would have gone with Sam Jackson and Ellie to turn the power back on. If I had the best defense I can say for that is that, desperate times, desperate measures, they didn't really have the luxury of, everybody staying together, because, that had a limited amount of time and resources to, try and find a way to escape, save everyone who's kind of spread out by the storm and the escaped dinos. So we can get off the island before, shit goes from hitting the fan to basically burying us in shit.
That is one big pile of shit.
Yeah, that's about the only justification I can think of for why the characters would have been spread so thin. But even then, I still have to ask, okay, you don't have security people you can send with every group. I understand that, the dinos killed most of them. Let's go with that. There should still have been a healthier supply of guns that everyone could have taken with them. Like, whether you know how to shoot them or not, it's like...
I know, right?
From Muldoon, it's like, Alan gets a shotgun towards the end of the movie, but apart from him, I don't think anyone in that movie had a gun besides Muldoon. And then, once he gets picked off, it's like... That's one thing I just have a hard time suspending disbelief at. Like, I get the park's not up and running yet, but you show that John Hammond hired security people. Like, he had to have had enough guards that there would have been, like, a healthy supply of armories at multiple spots on the island, not just one armory that we don't get into until, like, the third act of the film.
Another issue with that, Keith, is you would have thought, like, Steven Spielberg used, like, this tropical storm that forces the evacuation of the Jurassic Park staff, right? But you would have thought you would leave other people that were essential personnel on the island, like security, because you never know what could have happened. That's another thing. You're telling me that you leave just Nedry, Arnold, Muldoon, John, just literally four people that are associated with the park in the control room. No, even in the novel,
that's your skeleton crew. That's your skeleton crew. Is
right. And the
guy,
including the CEO, the founder,
the CEO. And it's the exact four people who are the least qualified to defend themselves in the event of an emergency that requires combat action. It's like the most qualified fighter you had left was Muldoon, and he gets picked off in the second act.
And speaking of that, really quick, if you knew he knew raptor speeds, right? He was an expert on raptors, supposedly. How come they really tore him apart in that podcast that I listened to? How come Dr. Grant was able to figure out that raptors do like this coordinated attack from the side? And Muldoon, if he's like this alleged expert, he didn't figure it out. He's like, oh shit. He should have figured that out. He just automatically assumed, okay, hey, isn't this kind of isn't this a diversion here? Why is this raptor right here?
The paleontologist who studied dinosaurs from a fossil context, never seen them alive before. He figures this out on day 1 or day 2, and Muldoon, the guy who's been working with these things for God knows how long, during their testing phases, like literally watching them, how they coordinate, how they attack, how they strategize. And he didn't figure out the flanking strategy with raptors until the last minute when it's too late. It's like, granted, even if he knew, there's not a whole lot he could have done by himself. Like, it's very... unless he had someone watching his back, like a 2-man group at minimum is what you would need to even try to coordinate against a raptor pack. Because, Muldoon can't shoot every direction at once. But still, it's like, how does Alan figure that out so early after seeing these things for all of like 5 minutes? Admittedly, there are so many ways you could tear these movies apart, even the best one, if you really think about it. But as we'll get into with the later films, at the very least, this one had the quality of its storytelling going for it and the chemistry of its cast. It sold its appeal well enough to compensate for the nitpicks you could tear it down with. The newer films, unfortunately, don't have any of that, going for them for reasons that I'll get into. I mean, but by the time we get to 3, where like the source material from Crichton has run out, 3 really should have been where the story ended. In my opinion, like if you had to do another film after The Lost World, this story really would have worked best as a trilogy, and it sucks that Crichton couldn't have written one more book to close out the mythology definitively. There were like no possibility of a cliffhanger, and I don't understand why Spielberg didn't come back to direct 3, because it's like I was watching a retrospective on it, and it like Joe Johnston, if I remember right, was the guy who directed 3, and he came to Spielberg, like they ran into each other at a party or something, and he told Spielberg, hey, just want to let you know I'm a big fan, so if you need someone to direct the next movie, keep me in mind. And it's like, I don't know if Spielberg was tied up directing a different movie at the time, or maybe he was just not interested in coming back. But if you had to do a third movie, at the very least, I think the tone of it would have been better, would have felt more coherent with the first 2 films if Spielberg had come back one last time. And a major fundamental issue that shot it in the foot before the film even got off the ground was like, they had no script going in. It's like William H. Macy was talking shit about Joe Johnston for this, if I remember my history of the production right. They were evolving the script as it went along. And granted, that's not... films, the final product can pull it off, in some films' cases. Like, Jaws changed its script like several times. But the difference is they had a book to work off of, and they knew what parts of the story they weren't going to screw with as it developed. They had a core blueprint going in. So Jurassic Park 3 doesn't even have that. No book. You have no script going in. You're making so much up as you go along. It's like, you wonder why 3 turned out so badly, why it feels like it doesn't have any idea what it's doing. Like Joe Johnston didn't even have an idea for what he wanted the story to be by the time they got into it, and then by the time ideas for 4 start, getting brainstormed, it's like, this is hilarious to me. I want to get your opinion on this. They screwed at one point. They actually screwed around with considering the idea of human dinosaur hybrids. Like, you heard me right, listeners. Someone actually thought it was a good idea to go Alien Resurrection with the Jurassic Park franchise at some point. Like, they were going to put full-on, like, deep state lizard people in this series. And it's like the number... we talked before about the Halloween franchise and the list of Halloween sequels that were never made. You would be amazed the ideas for Jurassic Park sequels that never got off the ground. Like, it is a wonderland of just wondering what these people were smoking with some of these pitches.
If they would have done that, I would have been like, no, that would have been the end of it. That would have been the nail in the coffin. I'm sorry. Like no, because they kind of did it. They kind of were messing with that in the newer trilogy, but about cloning and all that stuff, but I'll get into that later. But that idea, I don't think it would have been a good idea. There was another pitch that they wanted to have a movie about this group of Boy Scouts that get stranded on the island. I think it was on Site B, and I'm like, what the heck? Yeah, they wanted to have or college age kids. I mean, that could have been interesting, but we'll never know. But another idea they had was, I think that would have been kind of crazy. They wanted to have a Jurassic Park movie with dinosaurs that were like able to be, you can send them off into war zones, like as weapons. Like, what the heck? You could weaponize them, like drop them into Afghanistan or Iraq. And I'm like, what the hell?
I kid you not. In one of the ideas they were pitching for like the new dino hybrids that would have been introduced in whatever batshit version of Jurassic Park 4 was being plotted out at one point, I saw a picture of concept art with this like part man, part raptor motherfucker with a cyborg gun for an arm. Like, they were actually considering going like in a some
going into sci-fi.
They were gonna mix. It looked like something like Jurassic Park mixed with one of the demons from Doom, like all the cyborg demons you fight in that series. They were actually thinking of going that route. with Jurassic Park at one point, and I'm just like, you have just completely lost the plot at this point. Like, do you understand the hook of what made the concept of this story appealing in the first place? It's like, it's so simple. It's not the genetic engineering. It's not the science going too far. Those were all things that came about as an extension, like extended themes built off the core concept. The core hook of Jurassic Park, going all the way back to why people liked the book, was very simple.
Holy fucking shit, it's a dinosaur! Jesus Christ, what the fuck? Oh my fucking god, fucking dinosaurs! Holy shit, what the fuck?
You had such a simple hook, and you managed to lose that to the point, to just completely forget the point of why people were coming to see these movies. Is that you actually considered cyborg, human, wartime weapon raptor people. It's like just one-eyed flying purple people eaters at that point. It's like, what? Again, it's like, what were you smoking, people? Like, tell me you're running out of ideas without telling me you're running out of ideas. I hate to say it, Jurassic Park was not a story that lent itself well to franchising. It's like, I said this before about Scream. I'll say it about Jurassic Park 2. Again, at most, it should have been a trilogy. Like I've heard multiple people say this, including one of the retrospectives I watched to prep for this episode. This is what the story should have been. The first one is the island. The second one should have been like a region or archipelago of islands as the dinosaurs start to spread out. Like maybe they're attacking an indigenous human population on a series of islands. So the problem's starting to spread. The third one, which is this is what, if I remember correctly, this is what Colin Trevorrow or John Favreau.
Trevorrow.
Trevorrow, whoever it was that did Jurassic World. This was the story he wanted to do. Like Jurassic World Dominion, that was the story that multiple people had wanted to do for Jurassic Park 3, or at most 4, and it kept getting pushed back. Like Trevorrow, like you needed Jurassic World and then Fallen Kingdom to set it up. It was the same problem with the Star Wars prequels. Revenge of the Sith was the story George had been waiting to tell with the prequel trilogy, but you needed the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones to set it up. That's a widely agreed upon theory I've heard as to why the prequels did so poorly compared to the originals, because the first two movies largely just feel like filler. They feel like setup, and then by the time all the big stuff happens with Revenge of the Sith, you have all this poor will built up in the audience for how the first two films have been received. So it's kind of a no-win situation. Like, you need two films to set all those characters up that George wanted to do for Revenge of the Sith. Like, it was too big of a story to do all in one movie. But then, the first two films didn't have quite enough meat on them to justify themselves or to get audiences' investment in building up to that story. The Jurassic Park / World films had the exact same problem. You spent all your goodwill that had been built up for these characters after the first two films that, you barely had any left after 3. You try to reboot it with Jurassic World. It's the same problem as what the Disney Star Wars films did. Jurassic World is, like, in terms of the large story beats, it's not a beat for beat rehash. I wouldn't agree with that. But the large beats and tropes of it are just a rehash of the island all over again. The first film, Fallen Kingdom, started to go into all the cloning nonsense. And then by the time you get to Dominion, the story that Trevorrow wanted to tell, I swear, I have the trailer for Jurassic World Dominion is one of the biggest, the most solid cases, in my opinion. Like, I'm not a legal expert. If you had to try and build a case for false advertising, the trailer for that movie, the whole marketing campaign for that movie, it pissed me off in ways that I cannot describe. because it very clearly, the marketing executives had to know this. They're not stupid. Witness the epic conclusion to the Jurassic era. You had to know people were going to be expecting this to wrap up the story. Like, one way or another, the dinosaurs were going to have to be killed off. Humans and dinosaurs can't coexist. Direct quote from the trailer. We created an ecological disaster. You have Henry Wu saying we need to correct a terrible mistake. And they frame that dialogue to sound like he's talking about the dinosaurs. He's not talking about the locusts. They make no mention of the locusts in the trailer.
Yeah.
You see a little bit of footage of them with no context. It's clearly framed to make you think he's talking about the dinosaurs in general. And it's like they're setting audiences up to believe that one way or another, either the humans are finally going to kill all the dinos or the dinos are going to take over the world. It's like 11th hour, like Planet of the Apes. Either the apes win or humanity wins. There's no middle ground. There's no coexisting here. And the full movie, they backpedal on it. They lie to our faces with that ending, just like, oh, I guess we'll just coexist now. Yeah, this is the new normal for us. Let's live with these invasive species that are actively decimating environments around the world. I mean, there's so many problems with like the premise of them spreading around the world in the first place after what Fallen Kingdom did to set it up. But I just, oh my God, what a betrayal! You leave us on that cliffhanger after all this buildup of you didn't conclude shit, you didn't end shit.
It sounds like how they did a false advertising for Halloween Ends with that final quote-unquote confrontation between Michael and Laurie. That was, 15 minutes towards the end of the film? That was false advertising there, too. I mean, kind of going back to Jurassic Park, though, is they jumped the gun. I mean, speaking of untapped potential with video games, if I can say this really quick, there was a video game that came out in 1998 called Trespasser. It was a Jurassic Park survival horror game that Steven Spielberg's DreamWorks Interactive was part of that. He worked with game creators to create a sequel to The Lost World. Originally, he wanted this video game to be set after The Lost World and be as accurate to the film universe as possible with the buildings and landscape and dinosaurs, everything. And this survival horror game was meant to have the dinosaurs go inside buildings to chase the main character. Can you imagine how if they would have done that, that would have been amazing. Like, it easily could have been one of the best survival horror games, or arguably one of the best video games of all time, if they had done it right. There was a lot of missteps that they took with Trespasser. I mean, the guy that was in charge was Seamus Blackley, who was the creator of the Xbox. He was 25 when he was part of that project for Trespasser. I guess he had issues with the studio that were pushing for a quick release. They weren't able to work out all the bugs for the game. So they had to not have dinosaurs go into buildings, which I think was a mistake. They also, in terms of the dialogue, John Hammond, they actually got Richard Attenborough to voice him for Memoirs. You can hear him doing a voiceover, which was, I think, fantastic. But they messed up because they took dates from the novel that it wasn't faithful to the film adaptation, to the dates from the film. And so they messed up there too, I think. Come on, if Steven Spielberg wanted it to be the sequel to The Lost World, they should have done more to have kept continuity, but they didn't. That was so much lost potential, but I guess the mechanics of the game, it was a total flop when it was released.
Critical and commercial failure from what I'm reading. Allegedly, if what I'm reading is accurate, it was announced that Trespasser was set to, quote, revolutionize PC gaming.
Yeah.
Apparently it was a very ambitious project, but Yeah, I never played it. I wasn't even aware of it until you brought it up. The title sounded somewhat familiar, but yeah, I must not have even been interested in it enough to pay attention to it, because like the screenshots I'm seeing of it, it does not look like anything I would have seen. I mean, the Lost World arcade definitely looks a lot better than that. I will say that.
Yeah, and even in promotional trailers for the game itself, it does nothing. It looks nothing like the final game, which shows how much they tweaked it and they weren't able to fix all the bugs. And I think it was like a total misstep that it easily could have been the best Jurassic Park game if they had done it right. I mean, if they had dinosaurs chasing you into buildings, I mean, they should, you want to talk about remaking games? They should remake this game and fix it. But I doubt they'll do it. They should.
They should remake Trespasser. Or at the very least, it just remake Dino Crisis and take some ideas from Trespasser and add that in. I mean, obviously, then you get Dino Crisis purists arguing like, "Oh, this feels like more of a reimagining of the original game." But if it makes the experience better and scarier, I mean, to its credit, dinosaurs chasing you through buildings, like Dino Crisis did that to an extent, maybe not as much as what Trespasser planned to do, but Trespasser came out in 98, Dino Crisis 99, so we did see some version of that idea that worked and was scary come to fruition, and it's just a question of, well, could you expand on that so that the dinos can chase you in from the outside unless you go through certain doors and, I guess, barricade them, or maybe you have to activate like a electric. I'm thinking of like the doors with the electric locks that like bolt automatically. But it's like maybe you have to turn the power back on to get them to work first, and that could have been like a quest line or a mission in and of itself to help you proceed to the next level or something, or to block dinosaurs off from chasing you on this path, so you've unlocked up an optional safe zone for yourself now. I mean, there's so much you could do with that. And by the way, beginning of Jurassic Park, when they lose control of the raptor. And then later in the film, at the actual park, you see they've got like those electrified wires going up. Tell me if I'm misremembering the opening to that movie. Why did they not set up a perimeter of like an electric fence or something outside of the cage or the padlock, whatever it was that the raptor was in, and so that if it tried to break out, they'd have a perimeter to at least control it, like not kill it, but the voltage would be high enough to hurt it, or better yet. I mean, I guess this would ruin the whole story if Michael Crichton had brought this in, and so I guess he deliberately just didn't incorporate it into the book. Why did no one get the idea to put shock collars or security ankle bracelets on all of these dinos in their habitats so that you could keep track of their movements more accurately? Like, I'm pretty sure home arrest ankle monitors existed in 93. Shock collars would have existed in the 90s, I'm pretty sure. Literally just put a shock collar on every one of these dinos so that if the power were to go off, then as a reaction to that, the ankle bracelets would activate and shock the dinos into submission if they go outside their designated perimeter. That way, even if the fences went down, you wouldn't have them spread all over the damn island. It's like, granted, when they start reproducing and the population gets out of control, you have a bunch of dinos with no collars on, or maybe they get smart enough to start taking their collars off. But still, that could have been a story point to illustrate how they didn't anticipate, how smart the dinos were, or how this scenario they didn't plan for renders that security measure useless. But still, the fact that no one even thought to try it, I'm just like, I mean, I hate to say it, but even if it was intentional to some extent to show how ambitious John Hammond was being, even though he didn't think his dream through anywhere near enough, the fact that no one considered these basic security measures for these incredibly dangerous animals that you have no idea how to control otherwise is, you're clear. We see how effective guns are at corralling them. I'm just like, it's a shot caller, man. It's like, you see how effective it is with dogs. You're telling me Muldoon never suggested that as head of security to John Hammond? Like, hey, let's put collars on these raptors that are fast enough to outrun our guns?
And in the novel, it says that Muldoon wanted like top of the line military weaponry. He wanted like these nets. He wanted like heat-seeking missiles and a bunch of other stuff. He wanted like stuff to go to war with. In the novel, he was aware, self-aware. I guess in the movie he's different, but like in the novel, he wanted to suggest. But the thing is, John Hammond didn't want any lethal force with the dinosaurs, which is why Muldoon was limited in what he could do in the novel. Well, which doesn't make sense because
even non-lethal force, it's like it's like a shot collar would be pretty effective if you get the voltage high enough. And the best thing is, it wouldn't be compromised in the event that your whole security grid goes down, because it's like each of the collars, like, they're battery powered. They'd be on their own circuit. It's like, I'm no engineer, but if you had to come up with a fail-safe for if the fences and the security systems went down, and you want something that's non-lethal, but you don't have enough trank guns on the island, and even if you did, most of the staff have evacuated because of the storm, if you want a last line of defense, it's like, how much money realistically would it have cost, as much as Hammond was spending on all this shit? You couldn't invest in a few hundred military-grade shock collars?
And it's kind of funny you say that, because in Trespasser, when you hear his voiceover at times, because there's when you're during certain missions and parts of the game, you're playing like this female protagonist named Annie who gets crash lands on the island. But basically, at one point he talks about like how Site B came to be. Like, they had to bring in Costa Rican contractors who had to sign in non-disclosure agreements. They built the worker village. They had to lay the foundations for the facilities in Site B. And apparently John Hammond planned for like this hotel for guests and scientists and visitors for the island, this monorail system. He had like these grand ambitions for Site B, according to Trespasser. One of the things he does mention is that they did have like a tracking system for the dinosaurs in Trespasser, mind you, according to John Hammond's memoirs, that there would have collars that would be placed on the dinosaurs, and workers that would go out on the island would carry radio boxes, and if a dinosaur was in the vicinity of them, they would hear like this beep, 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 beep. And if a dinosaur came too close, then they said that they just drop their stuff and run. That would have been made it for a great horror prequel right there. Can you imagine? Like, you're just like this worker on Site B, like before the events of the first Jurassic Park film. You're just out and about, just working, maybe mending a fence or something. And you have like the radio on you, and then you just start hearing the ominous beeping, beep, 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 beep. That means that the dinosaur is nearby. Wouldn't you be scared? I would.
That sounds kind of like the motion monitor they were trying to use to find the xenomorph in the first Alien movie, like tracking it when Captain Dallas is trying to find it in the vent. And then it's like, oh, it's right on top of you. Where is it? And then you get that iconic jump scare in the vent. And see it. But honestly, like, in terms of the technology, that even for what was available in the 90s, it's just like, there's so much you could have done for these security systems that would have been non-lethal. And it's like, you're telling me that your asses may as well be up in the air? Or, just kissing them goodbye as soon as the fence goes down because you couldn't turn the Wi-Fi on and off again. And it's like that was your last resort. And now what? You have a few guns, one guy who's trained to use them left on the island, and you had to get a little girl who, conveniently is an expert hacker to turn your security system back on because it just happened to be the exact system that she's familiar with. And I'm just like, dude, it's as much as I love this movie, there's so much convenience happening here that could have been avoided if you literally just invested in some shock collars. I'm just saying.
Well, also, I'm just saying this too. I know I talked about it before the podcast tonight. Is had John Hammond hired the right IT people, he could have avoided that film's disastrous plot. Exactly. I mean, it's not paying Dennis Nedry more. It was like if he would have had the right IT people, turning the Wi-Fi on and off would have been the least of his problems. I mean, come on, come on, you're trusting. No, he was trusting the park's perimeter fences and security to Newman from Seinfeld. Let that sink in for a moment. You made the Jerry Seinfeld reference earlier in this episode. Come on, he let Nedry take control. And the thing is, the guy was so greedy. He's like, okay, they're not paying me enough, and I guess I'm such a hot shot, MIT, Cambridge, that you can't find anybody else that could do this job but me. I doubt it. If John Hammond did not want to cut corners, he would have hired the best IT people. And then on that side note, talk about infrastructure, right? Let's talk a moment about that T-Rex paddock. The fence, do you see how flimsy that is? John Hammond needed to hire the world's best structural engineers. If you were going to build a park like that, because you remember Jurassic Park 3, right? Did you remember the fence that the Spinosaur broke through in 3? How heavily fortified that fence was? That should have been the T-Rex fence. Instead, no. In the original movie, it looked like it was flimsy. The wiring was flimsy. Like, if you're going to contain a whatever 2-ton dinosaur or carnivore, you better have a better perimeter fence than just a flimsy fence that can just be knocked over by a wind. I'm sorry.
It's like even if the electricity, like the voltage goes out, wouldn't you design it with that scenario in mind so that even if it can't shock the thing, it can still keep it from breaking out? It's like, and those cables were far enough apart that, like, if it was just a little bit more flexible, it's like those jokes about the prison bars that you slip between because you're just thin enough to do so. And it's like, if this dinosaur had been smarter and worked out a little bit better, or if it was a little more coordinated, like, so many species of dinos could have just slipped right between those. He's no problem.
Yeah,
like, if he'd been even just exactly, if he'd been like big enough, he could have practically climbed over top of the thing like a cat, or just like at a certain point. I mean, Indominus Rex would have stepped right over that thing.
Right.
I wanted to come to that. You were talking about the tracker idea. Granted, a lot of the ideas from Jurassic Park Trespasser and what they talk about in the book, like as far as Hammond's grand ambition, like the monorail and all that stuff, credit where it's due. They brought a lot of that in and made it a reality for Jurassic World. So I will say that it as a love letter to the lore and the ideas that weren't explored in the original film, Jurassic World is a solid movie on its own if you just judge it outside of the rest of the trilogy. But again, because so much of it is just a rehash of that first film, the sense of wonder just isn't as strong there anymore. One of their subplots in that movie, which motivates the Indominus Rex being made in the first place, is, people aren't interested in dinos anymore. Which, first off, I categorically do not believe that would happen anywhere near as fast as they're saying that it does. Even if it's like 30 years after the first movie, it's like people would be interested in dinos for decades before they got bored of it that fast. You're talking about the biggest zoological revolution, and not to mention biggest genetics revolution of the millennium. There is no way, realistically, Jurassic Park was never trying to be 100% realistic. Yeah, with the dinos, it's like the people in this movie are people. You will never convince me that people would get bored of real life fucking dinosaurs. There's that fast to where they got to invest in building this Frankenstein's monster thing. It's like, first off, and granted they comment on this in the movie, Indominus Rex is not a dinosaur. Like, Chris Pratt said it, and he was right, but for different reasons that I'm about to point out, technically, that's not a dinosaur, or biologically, it would be considered a chimera, because as far as I found, chimera is defined as, in context of biology, an organism containing a mixture of genetically different tissues formed by processes such as a fusion of early embryos, grafting, or mutation, a DNA molecule with sequences derived from two or more different organisms formed by laboratory manipulation. Or thematically, if you want to tie this into John Hammond thinking he could control all of this, another definition for it is a thing that is hoped or wished for, but is in fact illusory or impossible to achieve. So that's actually rather poetic. And then, the whole franchise, the whole concept is a chimera in that regard, I guess. And technically, you could argue all the dinosaurs are chimeras by that definition because of mixing the frog DNA in. I would argue the Indominus Rex is the most literal embodiment of that, because it's literally just a Frankenstein's monster of different dinosaur functions and parts and features, just thrown into a blender, or because you needed a primary antagonist for this new movie. You already used the T-Rex 3 times. You already used Spinosaurus. So, and there's so many dinosaur species we had to draw on still. So it's like, hey, let's just make a giant raptor now. The raptors are so scary. What if we just made one bigger than the T-Rex, and that's your bad guy for this new one, and it's not even a real dinosaur? So it's like that right there is a sign that they were losing the plot by the fourth film.
Yeah, you could tell maybe some inspiration from that human dinosaur hybrid idea. Maybe kind of was it carried over into the Indominus Rex. No, because you're exactly right. Like, you have these dinosaurs, like Jurassic Park is like this success for 10 years by the time that film starts, right? And how do you think, from my point of view, like, I get within the film universe explanation. Okay, they're like, okay, so we're thinking if we make this camouflaging abomination of various different dinosaurs, a giant raptor, like you said, that's going to attract people. That's going to wow them. Ooh, ah. I mean, come on. Like, what were they expecting there? Like, I don't think that was the epic attraction that they thought it was going to be. Come on. I mean, and then obviously the human antagonist, Hodgkins, right? The guy that's like basically the equivalent of Muldoon in the Jurassic World series in the beginning. He was like interested in using him for weaponry, just like one of the earlier drafts for Jurassic 4, right? That they wanted to weaponize the dinosaurs for military purposes. Yeah. I mean,
thought he was one of the dumbest characters in the movies. He's a cartoon character. It's like no shade to Vincent D'Onofrio. No, I love him as an actor, but he plays that character up like a Saturday morning cartoon villain. It's like even by Jurassic Park universe standards, he's comical. He doesn't feel like he belongs in that universe at all. With how much he hams up his whole, war is part of nature. Progress always wins. It's nature pitting her greatest creations against each other, and we're breeding greatness. It's like, dude, it's like you could have a military, satire character villain, and who's like believes in weaponizing the dinos. You don't have to, play it up to this degree. Like, make him at least a little more reserved that I can, at the very minimum, take him seriously. But it's like, he comes off like a complete psychopath. It's like, who would trust this dude to run anything with this high security park? Let alone give him any authority when shit hits the fan, and Chris Pratt ends up having to go along with his idea of like, we're going to use the raptors to trap down this dino monster that's 10 times their size. Towards the end of the film, he's like flinging them around like rag dolls. It's just the final battle is cool. Well, it's pure spectacle by that point. It's a nice theme park entertainment kind of appeal for people coming back into this franchise, but it makes no fucking sense. Like, on its place, the whole concept he's talking about with weaponizing raptors makes no sense. And so it's like, even the idea of training them, it's just like, even if you could hypothetically do that, you're talking about them going into caves, going after like Iraqi insurgents or something, whatever war he was referring to when that film came out, or whatever country he was talking about going into. They're more useful than drones, and it's like, how? They're freaking animals. How is an animal more useful than a military grade, tricked out, basically miniature Iron Man arsenal drone that can, bomb an entire town from the sky? Like, you're telling me a pack of raptors is worth investing this ridiculous amount of money and time in to train? That's more practical than a drone strike?
See,
I mean, come on.
And by doing that, I'm sorry to say, even though, like, for me, Blue is like, I guess I have like a little bit of a soft spot for that raptor, right? But they kind of detracted from the original menace the raptors were in the original Jurassic Park trilogy. Mm-hmm. Specifically, the first one. In the first one, they really captured how highly intelligent they were. The third one kind of also does that a little bit. Yeah. But in the first film, the big one, when they open up the kitchen door handle, that was a great scene right there. Like, that showed their intelligence. And even though I love the tiger striped raptors in the Lost World, what I do love about the Lost World raptors is they were faithful to the novel adaptation, which meant that they were more animalistic compared to the raptors seen in the first Jurassic Park film. In the second film, they're more kind of tribal. They're more divisive, because you see it when, oh my God, when you see when they reach the worker village, right? When Ian Malcolm with his daughter and Sarah, Sarah Harding, which is supposed to be implied she's the daughter of Harding that's seen in the first movie, which is the veterinarian character. Staff member of the park. That apparently that's she was the daughter of him, the guy. Yeah,
forgot about that.
Ellie was talking to. No, but really quick, when you see Sarah Harding, like when she's like getting away from the raptors, you see those two raptors like go at it with one another, showing, I guess, how animalistic they were and not disciplined like the raptors in the first movie. But like with Blue and what they did with Jurassic World, though, like you're exactly right. Like they went from that to, okay, what are we doing here in Jurassic World? That seems like, okay, that now they're friendly towards humans. Like, I guess, like, if you want to try to argue that they really had to train them well, but even still, like, even wild animals, like, I know some people have exotic wild animals as pets around the world, tigers, bears, and they've managed to, quote unquote, domesticate them. But still, at the end of the day, with the raptors, I find it hard to believe that you domesticated them up to a point where they were kind of like trained pets. I'm sorry to say.
They did. Watch Tiger King if you want an in-depth look at how well that goes, trying to domesticate exotic animals. Those, I mean, I feel bad for those animals in general. Like they were the greatest victims of that whole documentary series. It's just that whole odyssey with Joe Exotic, Carol Baskin, like the whole industry that they were a part of. But it was an interesting idea having one of the main protagonists of the new films, Chris Pratt's character. Chris Pratt is basically the new Muldoon. You know, like he's the guy who he knows the dinos. You know, he has he has military experience. He's the action hero archetype who you think is going to make it. And then in Muldoon's case, you know, you think he's going to be one of the people that survives to the end. He gets picked off halfway through the film. You know, the first time he encounters the dinos out in the wild. And so Chris Pratt is basically that if you decide to make him more of a main character. And the idea of training the raptors was interesting, but I just don't see how it would be in any way practical to making a dinosaur park work, because it's like your goal isn't for these things necessarily to obey you, it's to keep them contained. And it's like, as long as your security does well enough, I don't really see the importance of trying to train them to begin with. Because it's
Right.
like, we see firsthand when they get out and start, wreaking havoc. I mean, outside of those few raptors that Chris Pratt worked with, had them imprint on him from their time hatching, we don't see any other dinos in this new stage of the franchise that were trained. And no, I don't count Mosasaurus, because that thing only showed up like twice in the entire film, and both times was for food. We didn't see any indication that it followed any form of instruction beyond that. Yeah, great design of that stadium, by the way. Very safe for the audience, with how high that fence was above the water. Or just imagine that thing, like, it launches up to bite into the shark, and then it capsizes like a whale going back into the ocean, and just splatters a whole section of the bleachers with its giant head on the way down. Outside those 5 raptors, it seems like kind of a waste of a program and valuable time and resources for you to invest in this guy to train these specific animals. And it's I don't know if the plan was for him to eventually expand the training program to work with other species, but as far as domestication goes, I think Blue is the one dinosaur in that whole trilogy that is successfully at least partially domesticated, but even then, it's that's one success out of how many failures. I get the feeling that the reason they invested in that idea so much was because Trevorrow or someone working with him just thought it would be a nice parallel to real life trainers of exotic animals, and they just went with the idea because, quoting Ellie with John Hammond's choice of plants that he put in the park, this idea was something they went with just because it sounded cool, but with not nearly enough thought put into the logistics of it or how it would be applied over later plots in the trilogy. Because the idea never comes up again in Fallen Kingdom or Dominion. It has zero use pretty much outside of Chris Pratt's relationship with that one raptor.
Yeah,
So
and
I
kind
don't
of
know.
no, and kind of when you mentioned Ellie talking about the plants in the first film in the lunch scene, right, at the visitor center, it kind of reminded me back to the novel real quick. In the first novel by Crichton, is when it talks about the raptors not being properly put into their own cage. I guess the reasoning is because I guess in the film hints at it too, okay, that they were so dangerous that they had to be placed in that specific pen. Well, shouldn't that give you the hint that, okay, maybe we shouldn't put these raptors then on the part of the tour, because if nobody's going to see them, why are we keeping them around?
Exactly.
I mean, that's one thing I'm thinking about. I mean, even the novel kind of hinted at that. They had this fence that, well, the thing is that Muldoon says it in the movie that the raptors were testing the weaknesses in the fencing they didn't attack the same part of the fence twice. They attacked different parts of it, and that displays their intelligence, right?
Clever girl.
In the novel, though, they went straight for the fence at Dr. Grant and them when they were just looking at it, when they were just watching them. And that fence, from how they described in the novel, seemed like more flimsy than how it was when that prison style guard lookout deal that they had for it. Come on, but the thing is, if the raptors were that dangerous, John Hammond had to have known, okay, we're going to have to euthanize them because there's no way we're putting them on the main tour. Because if we are, we're going to have to put them in, we're going to have to hire the world's best structural engineers to put them in a cage that they can never escape out of, because that was the only alternative if you wanted to display them, put them on display for the public, because otherwise, why are you keeping them around for? Just to study them? I mean, I don't get what the point was from the film perspective on that.
Steel reinforced walls with see-through windows. It was not big enough for any of them to break through and escape through, just big enough that people could walk up look in and see them, and that glass would be bulletproof, plexi-proof, that clear see-through glass, but it would be small enough, thick enough, and strong enough that there would be zero possibility of any raptor being strong enough, with their skull density, to break through it. It wouldn't look as glamorous and open and as the zoo aesthetic that Hammond was clearly going for. But I'm pretty sure that would have been a pretty foolproof, secure way for you to get a clear view of the animals in their habitat, watch them for as long as you want, and then move on to the next exhibit. It's like, if you could invest in enough thick enough bulletproof glass, arguably you could make a greenhouse habitat out of it where people can just walk around and watch them. But then when you have a larger surface area of that glass, that opens up the possibility of then someone could argue, well, if the raptors all work together, charging at the same time, then their combined body weight with their speed, the impact force could start to crack the glass at that point. In which case, I come back to it with small glass circles, windows, reinforced steel doors. I'm just saying, there are so many ways this park could have been designed that would have achieved the same result.
Yeah.
But structurally, it would have made so much more sense. Hammond's first fundamental mistake was trying to design this like a zoo, or a combination of a zoo and a children's amusement park, where structural integrity is just considered a secondary priority. It's just he was not the guy to design this park. He was a CEO. He was the business guy, the spare no expense guy. He clearly spared a lot of expense in the design department.
Yeah, because he should have hired the world's best structural engineers, I'm telling you, and consultants to make the park feasible and safe. Because I understand aesthetic should be the bottom of your list, John. I mean, because the number one top priority is the safety and security of your visitors to this park. Because you're going to get sued out the wazoo. Just like that. That's why that lawyer was.
It's like, realistically, how many customers would complain about aesthetics in the first place when you're giving them an opportunity to see real life fucking dinosaurs? It's like, imagine Hammond just being in the meeting with his lawyers about all the people in the public crying about how it doesn't look good, the brochure, it doesn't look like a zoo, we're so dissatisfied. It's like, that would just be a minority of trolls on Twitter, talking shit about it. And he would just be like, how many customers are we getting in a fiscal year? Yeah, how much money are we making? Yeah, you sure? Yeah, that's what I thought. Let me see the chart, our profits. Yeah, they can go fuck themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, come on.
You're telling me people are going to refuse to go here just because it doesn't look pretty? You're telling me I can see real fucking dinosaurs. I don't care what the damn thing, the building looks like.
That kind of reminds me of 3, the aviary where the pterodons are inside. That outside, it looks like it was. The outside, it looks like it was structurally okay. But the inside, that walking bridge, that fencing looks so flimsy. Even if it was electrified, what were they thinking building that?
One of the parts of Jurassic Park 3 that pissed me off so much, on the list of the top things that pissed me off in that movie, the whole concept of that aviary, even from the first time I saw it as a kid, I'm just like, I'm not going to use the R word, or just what? Absolute.
No, with a side of but I ain't been helping a boatload of grabbing.
Designed that shit. Just think about this for a second. Someone had to sit down and design this thing, and then someone they worked for had to look at that and sign off on it, And that, like, how many channels did this thing have to go to get the green light to actually be built? Built it. Someone was high off their ass trying to come up with the structural integrity of this thing, how it could possibly be feasible, not get you sued into oblivion the moment you let people start walking through here. Scientists, customers, people visiting the island. I don't care. And those people would look at the guy who brought this schematic to them, and they'd say, "You're stoned off your ass." And he would have said, he or she would have said, "Yes, I am." And this person was rewarded, not fired, or not laughed out of the building. Someone invested God knows how much money to build a giant freaking bird aviary. An aviary designed for parakeets, for eagles, for owls, and you thought this was going to work with fucking pteranodons?
Yeah.
What? Were you just... oh my god! Oh my...
Wait. Well, I was going to add to that really quick, Keith. Not only that, but like you took the time and effort to build that on Site B, because if you're not planning to have visitors to the island, wouldn't you have built that in Isla Nublar instead? Like, what was John Hammond's plan with that? That's another thing. And then, so let me ask you this then: how should they have built that aviary? I'm just curious from the design perspective. Like, how should it have been built then?
Well, in the first place, if it's a research island and it's not a tourism attraction, that I wouldn't have built the damn thing in the first place. It's like, I get that you gotta give avian dinosaurs room to move around. At the very least, one, make it completely solid, completely indoors. Just seal off a chunk of the island. Do it the way the Truman Show did it. Just a giant enclosed, sealed off indoor environment, like a stadium, a dome, solid every inch of the way around, steel, reinforced. There's plexiglass windows so you can look in, make them small enough that these things aren't going to just bust out through them. In no scenario do you design this thing like a freaking traditional aviary. You treat it like a box, like you ever seen the movie Cube? You remember that?
Yes.
The mid 90s horror movie? Yeah, basically that, but one cube as opposed to a bunch of them built into a giant one, and it just one cell, giant, just close off a whole perimeter or quadrant of the islands at Site B, and just devote that to the avian dinosaurs, put some air holes in it, like tiny air holes so they can get enough oxygen, and just steady them. Don't build a bridge in there. You don't want to walk in there to begin with. If you're setting yourself up to be picked off. It's just the idea of building, even for just scientific observation, the idea of building a bridge inside that thing. It's like, I mean, to quote Martin Brody, it's like ringing the dinner bell, for God's sakes. It's like you could have armored guards with trank guns walking in there, and they're just going to get picked off. They'll snatch them right up into the air. Yeah. And even if you manage to hit them with a trank dart, now you're just going to fall out of the sky and go splat it together. Just, I could do a whole podcast we could do a whole podcast episode discussing the list of design flaws with the Jurassic Park attractions. That one is up there. Like, of all the ones that were designed by a child with clear brain damage, that one is up there for me.
I've never heard anybody say that before. I love it. No, really quick. Another thing is kind of going with the pteranodons, right? You remember the other flying reptiles in the Lost World movie at the end. You see when the T-Rex is put it back on Site B, right? After that disaster in San Diego. You see if one of the flying reptiles, it's not a pteranodon. I think it's a pterodactyl, right? That you see it land on a branch, So if that, obviously that was a different species of flying reptile the InGen had made. So the pteranodon in the aviary, even though it's supposed to be the same island, right? Okay, so how come those pterodactyls were able to be flying around the island no problem, and the pteranodons were kept in that cage? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, okay, what happened there? Either they were in the same aviary, or were they in completely different parts of the island? That's another question that you have to ask yourself from a continuity standpoint.
With your continuity on this island?
I know, right? Like, oh my god, no.
Honestly, I guarantee you, the people who made Jurassic Park 3, whoever was in charge of designing the areas they went to on the island in the third one, guarantee they didn't rewatch The Lost World closely enough to tell how the locales they chose for the parts of the island Alan's group visits in 3 would match up with where Malcolm's group, all the parts they went to in The Lost World. Well, because you can tell at like multiple points, it doesn't even look like the same island. It's like the topography is different in some scenes. But the geography doesn't match up. It looks like two completely different islands at multiple points. I've heard multiple fans make this criticism, and it's just like at a certain point you're like, this is already derivative in that you have yet another island story, let alone crash landing on this one. But if Joe Johnston wanted to set this story on another island, then he should have just chosen another island. It's like site C, D, E, F.
Yeah, they were thinking of C.
Expand it to the archipelago idea at that point. It's like, why do we have to go back to site B yet again? And it's like, granted, yet again, maybe that's a little strong of a statement. I mean, that's only 2 times in the grand scheme of the franchise. As far as I know, they never go back there in the new movies. Which begs the question, what's happened with Isla Sorna as of Jurassic World Dominion, and is just nobody even gonna go back there anymore? There was this whole subplot of trying to steal a raptor egg, or the risk of stealing the genetics research off of the island, and rival companies getting into. That was a big subplot that never gets addressed much in the newer films, is like rival companies or InGen's competitors all trying to engineer their own dinos. They were setting it up like it was going to be a genetic engineering arms race. It's with new dinos being produced by these different companies, and that would have been a cool idea for a Jurassic Park 4 if you had competitors starting to produce new species or work with species that hadn't been seen before, that Hammond never worked with because his scientists thought they were too dangerous, but then a competitor is like, oh no, we can make it work. That could have been how we got Indominus Rex, because those rival companies are the ones that were dumb enough to start making prehistoric Frankenstein's monsters. And you would see examples of all these other companies being so much more reckless with this research, not taking any of the precautions that Henry Wu's character, I always forget his name, but you could have this dichotomy of Hammond's scientists were very careful about how they wanted to make these things, which ties into the book as well. But then when the genie is out of the bottle, and worst case scenario, you have multiple dino manufacturers competing with each other, now you have much more reckless versions coming into existence. Maybe that could have been where the hybrid idea started getting explored more. But by Dominion, it's just it feels like all that trilogy amounted to in the end was, we're going to do everything the first film did, and for the last film, we're not even going to be on an island anymore. That they're in human cities now. It's the San Diego scene from The Lost World, which so many people agree was the worst part of The Lost World, because you've taken all the wonder out of it by throwing a dinosaur into a human environment. So, it's a Godzilla movie now. It's the third act of King Kong. That's what so many people cheesed on The Lost World for. You're basically doing that, but all around the world now. So it's just, I mean, where's the sense of awe at that point? Like this is literally no different from a worldwide scale Godzilla movie now. It's a kaiju movie. Hey, that's all you've reduced it to. Whereas the first one, it really felt like you had these human characters stepping into a world from 65 million years ago, being completely out of their element. And now the dichotomy is reversed because the dinosaurs are the ones out of their element. The humans are just reacting to them. And it's like that completely changes the dynamic of everything the original story was trying to do. Even from a horror standpoint, because 65 million years ago, that world feels more alien, like we don't belong there. By putting them in human environments like an invasive species, you've by default made the setting, it feels more familiar now, which lessens the sense of uncomfortability for the human characters, because now they're being invaded rather than feeling like they're the invaders or the trespassers.
Yeah, and also what it does is with Dominion, when it was the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, with it, is in the first movie, I think Mike Crichton's message is very clear that man versus nature, and also messing with forces that are beyond our understanding as a species. I mean, by the time you watch Dominion, that goes all out the window, in my opinion. Like, okay, this message about evolution and about the dangers of bringing back an extinct species after 65 million years, you don't know what kind of ecosystem, how this is all going to play out. And then Dominion just goes ahead and just, we're just going to go ahead and just do this fever dream with it.
Yeah. And the music and the ending paints it like this triumphant, positive thing, like, this is all just fine, I'm okay with these events, we'll just live with this, all these dinosaurs, Jesus Christ, this is normal now.
and we're gonna get Scarlett Johansson in the next movie, even though we said this is it.
Oh my God. Yeah. We didn't say this was the end of the franchise. We said it was the end of the Jurassic era. See, it's a whole new era now. Now we're getting into Cretaceous world. Triassic
We're going to bring in Marvel. We're going to bring in, next thing you know, they're going to bring in not only Scarlett Johansson, they're going to bring in Florence Pugh, and Samuel L. Jackson might come back to reprise his role. Maybe Arnold survived.
Somehow. Just throw in G.I. Joe and Transformers while we're at it. Just fuck it. Just throw everything plus the kitchen sink, an entire public restroom's worth of kitchen sinks into this now, because this is normal now. We're just doing this and nothing matters anymore. All the themes that Crichton and Spielberg did in the first film have just gone completely out the window. Nature's not going to correct itself now. Now we're just fucked. And somehow this is a acceptable ending to a story that you spent 6 films, counting the original 6
and 2
films,
books and the video games,
2 books, 30 fucking years dragging this out. And that's how you end it, because the studio, the executives, whoever was in charge of making these decisions, they pussed out. And I don't like to say pussed out, because that kind of sounds misogynistic to me. But just these people wussed out. They didn't want to give up their cash cow, and they just decided we're gonna find a loophole to feel like we're ending one era but beginning another. Because we can't let this fucking thing die. God forbid we come up
just
with
like
a
Star
new
Wars
idea. No, we're gonna milk this until
Halloween
again, and nothing left but dust out of the breast of a skeleton. And that is how afraid, that is how perpetually terrified Hollywood is of letting these franchises rest and move on to do something new.
Well, now that they're probably pleased that Chucky ended. Now Don Mancini's probably not pleased, because NBC Universal is not going to renew his series. But
I
no,
know,
you're right.
that sucks. Like that Chucky series
No,
was
but-
so good. I was getting into
no,
it.
no, but the thing is though, like they're with Jurassic Park, they're trying to go the Star Wars route now. Okay, like they looked at Star Wars like, okay, Disney's milking this for all it's worth with these spin-offs on Disney Plus. Now we're gonna do this with Jurassic Park by doing the Netflix series Camp Cretaceous, doing this and that. And there's actually, speaking of another video game, they're in development. There's a game called Jurassic Park Survival, which is going to be set during the events of the first movie with one of the scientists that are left behind the island. So it's supposed to be a survival horror. So I don't know how that's going to play out.
The helicopter's taking off right at the end. Just imagine the camera pans back and you see like a group of other survivors who like barely made it through the storm. They were hiding on other parts of the island, and that's the last chopper taking off. And for the main group, it's a happy ending. Like, you know, Grant's sitting there with the kids.
John Hammond.
And looking at Ellie, just like, yeah, we can start our own family. I like kids now. And meanwhile, on the shores of the island, it's like all these people are just like, why? We're still here. Oh my god, where are they going? We're gonna fucking die. Oh my god, I've got kids.
They should play that Jurassic Park theme song you were talking about against that scene. Can you imagine that cheery rendition of the Jurassic Park? How would that look? This is they're gonna show like a flashback to them still on the island. 30 years later, they're still on the island. With an end credits scene, right? They're gonna show it.
Yeah.
They're still on the island 30 years later.
Or better yet, just show the choppers taking off. They're begging for them to turn around, and right then, Rexy comes out and just starts like, chucking them all around, just like drowning out their screams with its roar. And meanwhile, the credits are rolling. Chopper goes off into the distance. It's so beautiful. And right over here, just out of the camera's vision, these other survivors are just being slaughtered relentlessly.
Yeah, you're gonna see some blood splatter on the camera lens. They don't want to show it, and then they're gonna go black screen, fade black, because they don't want to make it into a R rating.
This is what this franchise has done to me. I don't give a shit anymore. It's like after
okay, just think about it. Think about it.
Giving a shit.
They went from that to now bringing Black Widow. No disrespect to Scarlett Johansson, but I mean, come on, this is where they're going with it now, because they brought her in for a reason, A-list actress, because they're desperate and they think that that's what's going to be enough to bring this into the box office again.
Yeah, they need another A-lister sexy redhead now that Bryce Dallas Howard's done. And yeah, they're not getting her back for another trilogy, like, because she, after all the shit she must have gone through with like social media on ragging on the new Jurassic World films. It's like I guarantee you, she and Chris Pratt are not coming back to this anytime soon. I mean, I swear, I feel bad for Bryce Dallas Howard because her character just got flanderized so much by Jurassic World Dominion.
I didn't know that.
Her love story with Chris Pratt's character Owen goes nowhere. It's like you think they're going to get back together, but after they kiss in Jurassic World, then 2 films later, it's like nothing has really come of that.
Can you imagine when the satellite phone scene, like if it would have been AT&T, that would have been the carrier for that. And then when they was trying to make the call, if he was trying to make the call, right, can you imagine? It would have been hilarious if there would have been an automated voice at the end of the line saying, "This is AT&T. Please, how can I direct your call?" And he would have been yelling, "Option 0."
Well, like that scene with Josh Duhamel trying to make that call while he's getting chased around by Scorponok. They're in the middle of that battle scene in Michael Bay's first Transformers movie. Yeah, they're in like the Qatar desert or something, and like the soldiers are fighting for their lives, getting slaughtered by Scorponok. He's trying to get through this like telemarketer douche who's to get a call in to get in like military air support or something. Oh my god, that scene was so funny when I first saw that movie
Oh,
in theaters as a
yeah.
kid.
That jingle though for the satellite phone was so iconic in Jurassic Park 3. Like that scene, I think it was somewhat effective. Like when Eric is with Dr. Grant, right? They're on the other side of the fence. They hear the ringing, the ringtone, and it's the Spinosaurus. They
tried to make that ringtone into like a horror.
No, but
movie.
the thing,
a sound signal, like the sound cue for the monster.
yeah, but also you also there's fans that have issue with the scene where it breaks out through the fence and chases them into the aviary. Like they're like, if it was that big, how could it not have broken through those doors? I don't even want to begin to debate that. You've heard that debate, right? That they said that the Spinosaurus should have busted through those doors when they were closing it in the entrance to the aviary. You've heard that argument though, right? When he was chased.
Honestly, I stopped paying attention to the discourse surrounding that movie so long ago. I just.
But basically, yeah, they question the mechanics of that. But either way, like, come on.
I don't even remember the last time I watched Jurassic Park 3, like from beginning to end. That's how little I care about it. It's like the last time I watched it was probably when I was in like high school. I own the first 2 films on DVD. And as far as I'm concerned, that's where the story ends. Like, I genuinely do not give a shit about much of anything that happened afterwards.
That's fair. No, like, Latu, what I wish they would have done, they should have brought in the 2 Carnotaurs from the novel, camouflaging Carnotaurs. If they would have set that at night, that would have been an effective horror scene, because that would have scared me. Like, there's no way I would have gone outside. Like, if that would have been me in that party, they told me, we need you to go outside, Alfonso. I'd be like, there's no way I'm going out there by myself with no gun. And there are possibly two Carnotauruses out there that can camouflage. Let me ask you, Keith, would you do that if they told you to go outside and you knew that there were 2 Carnotauruses that could camouflage and hide in their surroundings at nighttime?
Honestly, I doubt I would have survived long enough to make that decision in the first place by that point in the story. Yeah, I, in all likelihood, like realistically, I would have been one of the first people to get killed. It's like I would have been the intern who was hired to sit around getting stoned off my ass designing the aviary. Just the unpaid intern who got saddled with that job that nobody else wanted to do.
So then you would have been like, it would have been set during 1993 when that storm was hitting, right? You would have just been like here ignoring the order to evacuate Site B, just been like just smoking, so just ignoring it.
I would have been hanging out by the very rare prehistoric marijuana plant that I insisted get planted on the island for ecological study purposes. Is it like I'm the prehistoric research botanist who found the exact plant that I wanted put in this exact environment on Site B, making it out like it's purely for scientific research. And literally the whole reason I wanted my office to be in that exact area is so every shift I could just go outside on my lunch break. He could go to my special plant and just get stoned and all the way till closing time. Yeah, that probably would have been me.
Yeah. There's some of your coworkers are gonna run by you with everything. They're gonna say, "Hey, didn't you hear the notice to evacuate? There's gonna be a tropical storm coming through here. We gotta evacuate. We've been ordered to let loose all the dinosaurs on Site B." You're just gonna be just like all out of your mind, right? Would that have been your canonical ending?
Why not? Sure. Fuck it. Why not? Oh my god. This franchise is a trip, man, I'll tell you. One of the last things I'll talk about, and I'll get your opinion on this real quick. When I listened to Doug Walker, Nostalgia Critic's review of Jurassic Park 3, he brought up this point that like Doug Walker has a huge bias towards Rexy, the what they call the T-Rex. And when Spinosaurus kills the T-Rex on Isla Sorna, it's not the same T-Rex from that we're familiar with, obviously. but that whole battle scene where the Spinosaurus basically one ups the T-Rex because it was marketed to be the new big bad, basically like the T-1000 to the T-Rex's T-800. This was going to be the new big thing everyone was scared of. And Doug Walker was like, no, not the T-Rex. The T-Rex has to always win. I will not tolerate the T-Rex losing to anyone. And that's a deal breaker. And I'm wondering, like, do you think it was a good idea to try to replace the T-Rex with a new villain? And if so, was the Spinosaurus a good choice? Like, what species would you have chosen if you had to think of a dinosaur in terms of horror factor that could outdo the T-Rex?
So that fight I know is controversial amongst Jurassic Park fans, the Spinosaurus versus T-Rex and who should have won. In my opinion, I guess for nostalgic and a fan, I think it was a cop-out that the Spinosaurus won that fight. I think the T-Rex could have won, but maybe they thought it would have been too predictable. But the thing is, the Spinosaurus, it was an interesting antagonist. Apparently, they were trying to hint at the idea, even though Dr. Grant said it at during the movie, that the Spinosaurus was not on InGen's list, which was implying that InGen was doing top secret experimentation with the Spinosaurus as well as the Pteranodons in the aviary. But it's a whole different story. The only reason why I know that's because from behind the scenes of Jurassic Park 3, the making of the film. That Gigantosaurus, I don't know if that would have been a better contender.
The big bad of Dominion. And the dinosaur.
I don't know if that would have been if that would have been a better contender for the T-Rex for 3.
Well,
maybe. I don't know.
Honestly, the biggest appeal pun intended, the best appeal that I think Gigantosaurus had going for it was that it was just so giant. I mean, it's the dinosaur named from what I understand, named literally just for how big it is. And honestly, I thought that thing was a letdown.
But can you imagine that versus a T-Rex?
Because it's like
I know
it ends up getting killed so easy in the big climactic fight. I mean, there was more drama with the Indominus Rex final battle when it took the Raptors plus Rexy plus the Mosasaurus at the end to finally kill it. It was like this Terminator dinosaur that was just refusing to die. It took so many working together to finally overwhelm it. And then with Gigantosaurus, I think it only took there was Rexy, and it worked together with that dino that had the long claws that stabbed it or something. I honestly thought that was kind of underwhelming compared to the Indominus Rex fight. It's interesting because of all the stories in the franchise to go with, the big bad is this Frankenstein's monster of multiple dinos spliced together. I would think that if you had to do a new trilogy, then you would have saved that idea for the last film of the trilogy. You could have saved Indominus Rex or something like it for Jurassic World Dominion, and then the first Jurassic World, you could have just made it, instead of a hybrid monster, you could have made it Gigantosaurus or some new species meant to outdo the T-Rex, up the scale of the threat level. I don't know how intelligent it would have been if you could have done the whole thing they did with Indominus Rex, where it's it seems unusually intelligent, far more than anticipated. But yeah, just in terms of concept appeal, I would think that the idea of a hybrid aberration, and that it's not even a dinosaur. Like I said, it's a chimera. Yeah, then you would have saved that for the grand finale of the trilogy rather than starting off with it. Because the problem with that is, conceptually, in my opinion, creatively speaking, you can't really step it up from there.
I would have to agree, but there's a kind of, in one of the kind of early drafts for 3, they actually wanted to include a Carnotaurus. But because of Disney's Dinosaur that came out in 2000, they didn't want to do it. which I think was, well, come on, they were scared of the mouse. But on a side note, they thought about a scene, during the riverboat scene. They thought of a scene where Alan, well, Dr. Grant uses that echo chamber that was 3D printed, right? To mimic the call. The idea was they were going, he was going to use that during that scene, and those rafters that were pursuing them were going to show up and attack the Spinosaurus. I don't know how you would have felt about that. I think that would have been an interesting idea. They thought about a scene, during the riverboat scene. They thought of a scene where Alan, well, Dr. Grant uses that that Velociraptor echo chamber that was 3D printed, right? Yeah. To mimic the call. The idea was he was going to use that during that scene, and those rafters that were pursuing them were going to show up and attack the Spinosaurus. I don't know how you would have felt about that. I think that would have been an interesting fight. I don't know I don't know if you would have thought that would have been kind of like a parallel to the first movie towards the end of the film where the raptors attack the T-Rex. It kind of would have maybe been a little bit like that, but I would have loved to have seen how that would have played out.
When they attack Indominus Rex, yeah.
Yeah. And then the T-Rex in the first movie. I wasn't aware
they had an idea for that fight all the way
back
then.
wanted. I think it would have been an interesting idea if the Raptors would have attacked the Spinosaurus. Can you imagine how that would have gone down? I'm afraid the Raptors would have been taken out, though. I don't know.
I hadn't thought of that when when I was writing my fan fiction, I hadn't thought of that idea, but that is interesting. That could have maybe worked too. I guess I was trying to think of a way to where the T-Rex could have
but the T-Rex, that was a good idea too.
Some of its dignity preserved, so like it wouldn't be framed as like just a total loser of the movie. But that's an interesting idea too. Maybe they could have done both, and like the Raptors could have been summoned to attack it, and they could have wounded it further, or like injured it to the point that by the end of the movie, it would survive the Raptor attack, maybe retaliate and kill all of them, while Alan's group gets away on the river. But then by the end of the movie, the Raptors injured it enough that it's weakened to the point that now the female surviving T-Rex can come in, and you could have the rematch and have it finish it off. It would be like death by 1,000 cuts. Just like that would be the fatal flaw of Spinosaurus, is it's so relentless and single-minded in its goal that it neglects its own self-preservation. So it's like little by little, everything that it fights against is just chipping away at its health, like just chipping away the armor, until it's finally vulnerable enough by the end that, the female T-Rex could come in and finally get the justice she's been waiting for, that she could never accomplish when Spinosaurus was at full strength. I think that because nothing had ever managed to injure it this extensively before, so it's like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But, that's a good idea, too. I definitely would have incorporated that into it. It definitely is a way to bring the 3D printed Raptor vocal box back into the story. And I can see the asteroid coming now, folks. Fuck you very much to whoever tossed that penny into the fountain. That is going to do it for today's episode of Horror Convos. Comment below while there's still time in between hugging your loved ones. Which dinosaur media do you think excels the most at horror? Any specific dinosaurs you wish we saw more of in a scary capacity? Don't be shy with your opinions. Remember, this is more than a podcast. It is a dialogue between horror lovers. Here is your regular reminder that Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. New episodes release every other Wednesday. Be sure to like, subscribe, so you never miss when our newest content is uploaded. Until we talk again, good night, be well, and be safe trick-or-treating.